Since it's fall and leaves are falling, we'll read what Thoreau says about the leaves. Hmm. Edith is, page 342, Edith is, I think, Emerson's daughter or something. Or Edith's opinion mattered to Thoreau. She was growing up into a helpful ally, often bringing him flowers and specimens. It was a beautiful beautiful fair weather fall, and suddenly Thoreau was busy again in the social world. He took Alan, Edith, and Edward a barbarian at Conatum. Those are the children of Emerson. He took Ellery Channing sailing, then took Sophia boating on Fairhaven Bay, where she made a sketch, and he paddled Elizabeth Hoare and her friend up the Onset and Sophia and Cynthia down to Concord. Remember, Sophia is his sister. All the while he took notes on autumn leaves, which moved him as never before. Quote, "How beautifully they go to their graves, how gently lay themselves down and turn to mold. They stoop to rise, to mount higher in coming years, the year's great crop. Quote, they teach us how to die." Walden, with its powerful emphasis on spring and regeneration, was not the place for these darker reflections. He set them aside to become the seeds of autumnal tints. Did he write autumnal tints? You may have written something. The busy social season rolled on into winter. Cynthia's friend, Caroline Brooksroar, wife of Judge Ebenezer Rockwood Hoare, had an idea. The Christmas of 1853 should be a true community celebration. Celebration. Every child in town, rich or poor, would have a gift chosen especially for them. Organizers compiled a list of every child, age 16, 700 in all. In 4 weeks, the women of Concord prepared a present for each one, collecting money and sewing clothes for the poorest families. Henry agreed to provide the Christmas tree. On December 22nd, he walked out to a swamp in Lincoln and cut a small black spruce, which he delivered to the town hall. Inside, the little tree was suddenly huge, filling the stage, so tall that its topmost spire had to be cut off. At 6 o'clock on Christmas Eve, the doors were thrown open and hundreds of children rushed into the hall. We're having Christmas with Thoreau in Concord. Are we going to Concord for Christmas? They better have that same tree there, lit by the candles decorating the great spruce. Perfectly splendid, though Thoreau, true to character, said the starlit December sky was more splendid still. Around the tree were piled hundreds of presents, and St. Nicholas himself bounded onto the stage, tossing sweets to waiting hands as names were called and packages distributed. So Christmas was better than now. Right? It was a festive start to a real New England winter, so cold it nearly froze the Thoreau's water pipe, followed by a grand snowstorm that blocked all the roads and closed the schools. Henry tried out his new snowshoes. If you would recall the prior reading, it may not be in a reading, but he had paid quite a bit of money for snowshoes from an Indian. That was his prized possession. New snowshoes in a wind so strong that in just 20 minutes it wiped away his great snowshoe tracks. The streets were desolate and the snow banked high against the windows and doors and windows, but inside Thoreau found everyone merrier than ever. At the post office, every traveler was pressed for news of the railroad cars in the depths of the snow out their way from 14 to 24 inches. Thoreau calculated, out and about with his 2-foot ruler. Then, as suddenly it thawed and the eaves ran with water. Quote, "We too have our thaws," unquote, he reflected. Quote, "They came to our January moods, thought that was frozen up under stern experience, gushes forth in feeling and expression." Thoreau had indeed thawed. His busy social life continued into the new year, 1854. William Teppan, the New York acquaintance, who 10 years before had tried life in a wilderness cabin in New York, visited in early January, saying little but running through the snow, lifting his knees in delight like a child. Reluctantly, Thoreau got himself fitted for a new coat, and though he hated it, quote, "Who am I that should wear this coat?" It was fitted upon one of the devil's angels about my size, unquote. It decked him out suitably for a court appearance in Cambridge on January 19, 1854, as an expert witness in a property dispute. His client lost, but the day gave him occasion to visit with Thaddeus Harris, who identified his mysterious cocoons as the magnificent emperor moth. That's the botanist guy. Clad in his warm new coat, he set off late that January for a long-anticipated visit with Blake and the Worcester disciples, including a long walk with them all in the bitter cold. See, he did bitter cold walking with his special coat. But the news that season, the real news, had been the arrival on October 28, 1853, of 706 unsold copies of A Week, which Thoreau hefted up 2 flights of stairs and stacked in his attic bedroom, half as high as his head. That's all his books is A Week on the Merrimack River, unsold. Quote, "I have now a library of nearly 900 volumes, over 700 of which I wrote myself," he joked mordantly. Then followed the bittersweet moment exactly a month later when he walked into the office of James Munro and Company and paid off, to the last penny, the debt of $290. It's a lot of money. Remember, his profit from the bean field is like $8, right? Wow. He paid $290 for publication of A Week. It had taken him 4 years and 7 months. He opened a new account with Munro, placing 12 copies of A Week for sale. Quote, "How can a poet afford to keep an account with a bookseller?" he moaned, noting glumly that his first book had earned, all told, the grand sum of $15. You know how I made like what did I make? About $140. Hmm. God. At long last, however, he was free of debt. Thoreau celebrated his release by plunging into the final round of revisions to Walden, working in new material from his 1853 journal and intensifying the incandescent coming of spring by adding in real time a giddy passage from the sudden wonderful thaw, quote, that sand foliage convinces me that nature is still in her youth, the earth not, quote, a mere fragment of dead history, but living poetry like the leaves of a tree. A week later, Walden Pond was thundering with the weather, and Thoreau was marveling how alive it was, though, quote, so large and cold and thick-skinned a thing to be so sensitive, unquote. Even in the dead of winter, everything was pulsing with life. Attuned to changes no human being could register, for earth is all alive and covered with feelers of sensation. Fifthly, the largest and hardest and largest rock, the broadest ocean, is as sensitive to atmospheric changes as the globule of mercury in its tube. Though you may perceive no difference in the weather, the pond does. Walden was finished. Wow. Walden was finished near the end of February 1854. Thoreau was writing out the fair copy for the printers. By mid-March he'd contracted with Ticknor and Fields, Boston's finest publishing house, for an edition of 2,000 copies. Greeley congratulated Thoreau and announced the book immediately. After 9 long years, everything was accelerating. On March 28th, the first proof sheets arrived, and for 2 months, Thoreau was busy correcting them, promising an annoyed printer to write more illegibly, polishing for clarity and force and coherence and accuracy. He was so preoccupied he missed the first skunk cabbage and the ice-out date on Walden Pond. But whenever he could break away, he was richly alive to the world around him. The earth is all fragrant as one flower, he wrote on May 16th. Nature is now perfectly genial to man. On May 24th, he walked to Emerson's Cliff before dawn as the sun raked across. From the eastward expanse of ground fog, he thought the effect gave a new aspect to the world. The sun is eating up the fog. He faded into Bechstein swamp, observed frogs and Andromeda flowers, and late in the day drew up a long list of the leafing times of shrubs and trees, casting up the true accounts that had gone into arrears, what with all the proofreading. He did not know that in Boston that same day federal marshals arrested and imprisoned Anthony Burns, an escaped slave working quietly in a Boston clothing store. 2 days later, an angry crowd, led by several of Thoreau's friends, Higginson, Alcott, Theodore Parker, and Wendell Phillips, mobbed the courthouse where Burns was held, but failed to free him. In the trial that followed, Judge Edward Loring ruled that as property, Burns must be returned to its owner. On June 2nd, Bostonians shrouded the street in black and watched as Burns was marched in chains to the harbor, where a ship waited to take him south. The procession was guarded by police with guns drawn, armed federal marshals, an artillery regiment, and 3 platoons of Marines, one armed with cannon. The birthplace of American Revolution was effectively under martial law. We read from Thoreau